Welcome to New Atlas Live. I'm Brian Berletic. Joining me as always is Angelo Giuliano. We might have some other guests pop in later, who knows. Today we're going to talk about this supposed US-European split. It seems pretty obvious to me, especially looking at the actual evidence regarding the policy of the Trump administration. And we're going to go over all of that. We're also going to look at the history of US relations with Russia and also with China and this constant cycle. And Angela, I will ask you before we get into all of this, can you think of some examples of the US extending its, let's get my hand in, extending your hand of friendship to someone? They take your hand, you pull them in and jam a dagger into their gut. The US has repeatedly done this to both Russia and China for decades and decades and decades. They have done this. And we will go over examples of that. Can you think of an example of that, Angela, right off the top of your head?
Well, there's so many U.S. allies that were ditched, that were used and, ditched, like from Vietnam, Saddam Hussein, countless examples. Even at some point you had Gaddafi that actually, was getting closer to France and then, and Europe, and then was ditched completely. So I think we are living a very critical time, and it's very counterintuitive. Our problem right now, especially with this Maga movement, we have lots of our friends. We, kind of tensions, I have to admit, that friends that we feel very close to. We have similar ideas. But again, what happens is that I think this is a discourse where we actually share between people that are doing research, similar research that we do. We share and actually we grow together. That means that we have our opinions. We keep on learning. And as time passes by, we learn from each other, and the events actually changes our thinking. This is how it is done. Some people are early on, some people follow. It's the same as product adoption. You have the early adopters, then you have the laggers, and you have the last ones, the really last ones. So when it comes to Ukraine, that's a good example. How many jumped into the bandwagon of saying, well, Ukraine, Zelensky is a good guy, and then slowly they're adopting our views, and then they late, and then you have the laggers. The last one to actually start using smartphone. A smartphone at the beginning was, what's the point? Well, it's the same. So we're learning, and I think we need, on our side, you and I, we need some tolerance, and then sometimes actually we might lag too on some points. But here it is very counterintuitive. What people are looking at Maga, it's very hard to see the full picture. And I think there's also we are facing what we call the wishful thinking. I give you an example, a very simple example. What we saw October 7th. A lot of people, they jump into the conclusion saying, well, IDF is not the mighty force we thought. This was an intelligence failure. And remember, we have the episodes on the New Atlas. You and I, we didn't believe in intelligence failure.
Like the day after, yeah. And we warned that Israel's going to pace themselves and they're going to flatten Gaza. And that's exactly right. What they did.
So now with Maga, I think it's the same. I give you an example. So many people, they despise this woke agenda, this globalist agenda, Soros, Obama, and so on. And now you have Trump coming up with lots of very attractive concepts, meaning that we are going back to more conservative values. Now he's bringing some interesting personalities like Tulsi Gabbard, reform the deep state. There's make America healthy again, with some good points, against vaccines and those lobbies. There's lots of things, but those are the surface, the really surface. And actually, the US needs to go through that. You see, the MAGA movement is making the US stronger in some ways ideologically too, because the only way you can have people fighting into trenches, you need to have patriots, and you need to raise masculinity and so on. You need to have people that love their countries, unlike what they have been taught to dislike their country and to embrace globalism. So now they're getting a step back. And so people, they should be really careful. It is very counterintuitive. We need to look at the big picture and what is driving the events we're seeing. And now we are going to jump into the EU. Is the US ditching the EU? That's the big question. You want to start on that, Brian?
Well, because you mentioned Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, I just want to refresh people's memories, and I apologize ahead of time. It's a gruesome picture, but it is reality. There is U.S. President Barack Obama shaking hands with Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, and I remember at that time, and I was warning people, don't buy into it, don't believe it. There was this euphoria that the Obama administration was going to end all the Bush-era wars, all of these countries that the U.S. lied about, demonized, including Libya and Syria and Iran. Remember the Iran deal? This was manifested in these think tanks, and then the Obama administration presented it to the public. They were going to bring all of these nations out from the cold back in, and we were all going to have lasting world peace. And it turned out, no. One hand, they reach out to Gaddafi. He reaches out and accepts it. They pull him in and they literally jabbed a knife into him and killed him. That's what happened. And they did the same thing to Syria. Then U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry actually met with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and his wife. They had dinner together, and they were talking about the same thing. Well, the thing in the past, and it was the Bush administration. We're different. We want a different approach, and we can work on all kinds of things, and we can repair all of this. And what they were actually doing was not just trying to lower the guard of these two countries. And I feel as if Syria and Libya, they both let their guard down dangerously. They were letting all of these people out of prison. The U.S. said, before we make this deal, why don't you let all these people out of prison? These were all of the extremists the U.S. then took literally out of prison, turned into an army, and used to overthrow and completely burn to the ground both countries. That is what the U.S. did to both of those countries. And they've also repeatedly done the same thing to Russia and China. We will get into all of that. But what I want to do here is I want to go back to this comment from U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. I'm going to play this again. Let me hold on a second. Let me do this. Just a moment. Share browser. Hegseth. Let's see, where is it? Hegseth calls. Just a moment.
Brian, you wanna? In the meantime, maybe I can just put a few points. Unless you're ready.
Yes, I'm ready. I'm sorry. This thing with StreamYard sharing the audio. People in the comment section, please let me know if you hear the audio. Let's listen.
The United States faces consequential threats to our homeland. We must and we are focusing on security of our own borders. We also face a peer competitor in the communist Chinese with the capability and intent to threaten our homeland and core national interests in the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. is prioritizing deterring war with China in the Pacific, recognizing the reality of scarcity and making the resourcing trade-offs to ensure deterrence does not fail. Deterrence cannot fail for all of our sakes. As the United States prioritizes its attention to these threats, European allies must lead from the front. Together, we can establish a division of labor that maximizes our comparative advantages in Europe and Pacific, respectively. In my first weeks as Secretary of Defense under President Trump's.
Okay, and then he talks about how Europe needs to double down on Ukraine. He has also said, "Make NATO great again." And in either this discussion or another one at very close time intervals, he talked about how Europe, each nation, needs to go from 2% to 5% of their GDP in terms of NATO defense spending. And he also talked about how the U.S. and Europe both must massively expand their military industrial base, their production of arms and ammunition. And you and I, we talked about this last time with Rashid, Angelo. We talked about how, what is the purpose of doing that? The purpose of doing that is to fight and win this proxy war the next time you fight it. So what you're talking about is not peace with Russia, not peace in Ukraine. You're freezing the conflict so that you can buy yourself the time you need to do it again and actually win it this time. He's saying it to you. And here's the question. Maybe I will ask this question to you, Angelo. Why are people who are listening to President Trump say things, they know he just says things, and then the next day he changes his mind, and it's really just a dust storm. You don't know what to make of it. It's constantly shifting. Sometimes you think you could see something in the distance, sometimes you can't. But in reality, where does policy come from? It does not form like a cloud inside the president's head and then come out as policy as he blows hot air out of his mouth. It comes from special interests. There are huge corporations, multi-million dollar, multinational corporations that have tremendous power and influence over Washington, over both sides of the aisle, who helped get President Trump into office. They paid for his campaign. They're the ones that determine policy. How do we know what policy they're pursuing? Because there are many of these companies, many of these interests, they need to arrive at consensus. So they do it in these think tanks. And I always talk about these think tanks. We show the papers, we show papers that they wrote years ago, and word for word, everything that they're saying now came from those think tanks. And as a matter of fact, what Secretary Hegseth has just said comes from a think tank policy paper. But Angela, I want to add, before we look at that, Angela, I want to ask you, why do you think people sidestep what Secretary Hegseth is saying here, and they just hear, claims that the U.S. wants peace with, not just peace with Russia, but also peace with China, even as he's saying, he's lying. He's lying that China is threatening the U.S. and the U.S. must react. So it's more of the same that the U.S. always does. They lie about a country, a targeted country, to justify aggression against it. Why are people ignoring this?
Well, Brian, this is the usual wishful thinking. And actually, to be honest, I wish I was also in that position, because people need hope. You want to believe that there is going to be change, and we are not in a vicious circle of electing and regretting, and the promises turn into reality. What happens is that average Joe, and we do understand that it doesn't go through the think tank papers that actually shape even Trump's policy. Trump's policy, they come from those plans that are, led by those think tanks that are actually shaping the policies of all those governments. Those are long-term policies, for decades. And if you need to go back to even, you mentioned this before, the Pentagon papers already were mentioning that the ultimate prize for the US was China. So the only thing is that we have some cosmetics there. And actually those cosmetics do make sense. It's a more conservative approach. And even this more conservative approach has some elements that actually are in favor of this imperialistic agenda, meaning that, when you look at, I look at the paper you sent me just before. I don't know if we are going to mention on this show.
We will.
But this paper actually is saying that the only way we can get soldiers there in the Pacific, US soldiers, is that we need to indoctrinate those people into being more conservative, because conservative values, let's look at, and I don't want to make too much like people, the analogies like Hitler, but in reality, what happened is that in the 30s, Hitler actually promoting those sense of families, all those things that makes people fight for what they believe is tangible and is important for himself, as opposed to being nihilist. Nihilist is when you believe in nothing and you are a brainless consumer, slave labor. And this is actually the woke agenda. The woke agenda was the other extreme. So now they need to go back to something more conservative. And actually, Maga, that ideology is actually working in that favor. Not to say, to be honest, I'm myself conservative, but I'm realizing that actually this works on the side of this imperialistic agenda. So now I think a good exercise that we can do is that basically we can put ourselves into this second position. What I mean by second position, it means that what if you are Trump and you have U.S. imperialistic aspiration. What do you do? And you realize that I've been trying to think, many different scenarios, but actually, I realized that if I've put myself in his position, what he did was the exact thing, the best thing to do. Actually, look at it, ditching EU, but it's not really ditching EU. You're shifting the responsibility towards EU. What does it do? The EU, you force the EU to be more independent and to raise their military spending, which, by the way, those spendings are going towards US weapons. So you're making money out of this, but you put them in a position that they have no choice. So far, they had problems to raise from 2% to 5%. Now they have no choice. You still have Russian that have pinned soldiers in Ukraine. Now you disengage from Europe and you can shift your attentions toward the Pacific. Now you go from Russia being your enemy to Russia being neutral, meaning that if you have a confrontation between the US and Russia and China, now Russia is in a position of being neutral. Because if you look at Putin has a policy of non-alignment, kind of neutral. Why would you align with China? In reality, it's Russia first. So if there was to be a confrontation, Russia would not join, especially now. It makes sense. Now the US can shift towards Pacific, all the resources there, and actually also in terms of fame, in terms of face, actually shifting now. The US doesn't lose, but it's shifting the problems towards the EU. And Trump is looking like the savior. Is gaining points on all aspects. That was the best thing to do. Is winning on all fronts. But ultimately, it's not about peace. Here, we are going to have an ongoing war. It's not going anywhere. It's just disengagement from the US. But ultimately, the US is still actually helping into keeping the war there because the weapons will be Americans, but actually provided by the EU. So I don't see, for the US, if I was Trump, why would you want this conflict to be solved? No, maybe you keep hundreds of thousands of Russian troops being pinned down there. But keep in mind, Trump is not a man of peace. Ultimately, what we have is just perceptions that are different. Before we have globalist imperialistic project with US characteristic. Now, and it was like kind of very liberal, like woke. Now you have conservative US-centric imperialistic project, which is backed by US big tech oligarch. It's slightly different, but ultimately it is about hegemony. It is the same. It is going to be brutal. But the focus is just China. And this is why when you look at the team of Trump is all Mersheimer school, and people need to learn about Mersheimer. Mersheimer was always about focus on China and actually don't get extended too much towards Russia. Russia will get back to Russia later. But ultimately, if you get China, Russia will fall, will fall because Russia will be too isolated.
Yeah, so this is where we're going. So we just listened to U.S. Secretary Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, talk about division of labor. The Europeans are going to take on Russia. The U.S. is going to go take on China. And people are hearing that, but then they're not hearing that, and they're just choosing to believe that the U.S. wants peace with both Russia and China when there is no evidence of that in terms of the actual policy papers. All of this comes from. They're just not making decisions off their cuff. They never did that before. And Angelo, you were talking about President Trump, and just think about his first term in office. He did the exact same thing. If people remember, he talked about good relations with Russia and China at the very beginning of his administration. And then from that point onward, he continued absolutely every policy that was handed to him by the Obama administration. He armed Ukraine. He was the first one to do it. He brags about it. He sanctioned European companies for doing business with Russia over Nord Stream 2. And then with China, he was supposed to make some big trade deal with China. But then what did he end up actually doing? Attacking and undermining Chinese companies. They wanted to. This isn't President Trump thinking this. This is these special interests, these corporations who are threatened. Their monopoly is threatened. So they want to bury their competition. That is what the Trump administration did. That is what the Biden administration continued to do for 4 years. Anyway, we're looking at Project 2025. And people may have heard this. This is out of the Heritage Foundation, which is just one of many of these corporate financier-funded think tanks. If you go to their website and you try to find out who is funding them, you're going to find that that information is not very easy to find. But this is an older 2014 annual report from the Heritage Foundation, and it's things like Chevron, Lockheed Martin, Google, Microsoft. You get the picture. It's all of these giant corporations that do everything from big arms, big oil, big tech. That's who's actually driving U.S. foreign policy. So they have this Project 2025, and that is what Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is reading from. Now, I took some excerpts from it, and actually the links to this are already in the video description below. So if you look in the video description below, you see the links to this. So this was part of it, and says U.S. allies must also step up, with some joining the United States in taking on China in Asia, while others take more of a lead in dealing with the threats from Russia in Europe, Iran, the Middle East, and North Korea. The reality is that achieving these goals will require more spending on defense. Okay, how much clearer does it have to be? Isn't that almost exactly what Secretary Hegseth said in Brussels? Isn't that almost exactly what he said? He's taking his policies from these think tanks, as all presidents have always done throughout these many years. We've been pointing that out. Let's see what else there is. China is mentioned something like 20, 30 times in this document. And it's all about repeating these lies about what a threat China poses to the US, which Secretary Hegseth also repeated. And he's talking about Taiwan and the Philippines. And these were all things that the Biden administration just spent 4 years on, and the Obama administration 8 years on, and the Trump administration before that 4 years, the first Trump administration. They all pursued all of these policies, and it continues under Project 2025. Now, people could say that Project 2025 has nothing to do with the Trump administration, although it consists of people who have been in his administration, and he's obviously taking pages from it. That is exactly what Secretary Hegseth presented. Let's see, what else do we have here? There's a lot on both China and Russia. They're mentioning both of them, and none of it is talking about making peace with either one of them. It's about holding Russia while they deal with China, and then coming back to Russia again. And then this was interesting. Counter China's Belt and Road Initiative globally. Do you know what the Belt and Road Initiative is? It is a global spanning project that China is engaged in to bring desperately needed modern infrastructure to nations all around the globe. I'm here in Southeast Asia, and the Belt and Road Initiative runs through Southeast Asia. And it is bringing infrastructure to this region that nobody else would build. And it is infrastructure that is changing the whole face of the region for the better. You can see the tangible difference that it is making. So what the US is saying, we're going to counter development around the world. That's what they're saying. And as I'm pointing all of this out, a friend of the show sent me, he's always sending me these Senate hearings. They're sometimes 3 hours, 5 hours long. This is Protecting American Interests in a Convergent Global Threat Environment. This was February 12th, 2025, the U.S. House Armed Service Committee. And who did they have there? They had General Jack Keane of the Institute of the Study of War. And if you listen to these 3 hours, you will see that it overlaps almost perfectly with Project 2025. It also overlaps perfectly with this think tank, also associated to President Trump and his administration, the America First agenda. It's all the same things. The threat of communist China, building a military to go confront China, the threat of Russia. It's all in there. It's all in there. So this is what we're trying to raise awareness of. There is actual evidence that the policies that we see taking shape in this new Trump administration are being drawn from these policy think tanks, these papers, which are laying out continuity of agenda. Angelo.
Well, Brian, I think we can also remind people how actually they are shaping this war against China. There's 7 dimensions to it. It's a hybrid warfare, but at the same, when it comes to news, propaganda, lots of there are billions of dollars that are actually going against China, on demonizing China. Now there are multiple fronts. So you mentioned just before the Belt and Road Initiative. What they need to do is actually you need to look at the choke points when it comes to trade. So they are going to try to hit China when it comes to sanction, to just make sure that China doesn't have access to the latest technologies, especially microchips. So sanctions, and also they look at maritime routes and trying to contain China there. And this is why when you mention Belt and Road Initiative, Belt and Road Initiative is actually a way just to bypass choke points like the Malacca Strait, the Panama Canal. Why do you think they actually mention Trump wants to take control of Panama Canal? This is not, it's not out of the blue. It's because this is a potential choke point. Now, Greenland is the same. Greenland is also a very important maritime route. They are, potentially it's a very profitable route for China because it's shortened the trip, So this is looking at the wallet of China. Trade is important for China. So if you can contain China economically, it can put pressure within China, and they're hoping maybe at some point like potential regime change. They hope that, even though it's close to impossible. Now there are contentions, they're trying to use trilateral alliance. There are two trilateral alliance. One is Japan, South Korea, and the US. So you see they're putting actually South Korea, which actually South Korea and Japan, they kind of enemies, but they're putting them together to fight against China. We had a coup in South Korea, which was actually indirectly linked to China. Now they're pushing for pro-independence movement in Taiwan. So they're pushing for, Taiwan's to declare independence. That's another one. Now you have the trilateral alliance, AUKUS, Australia, UK, US. And you have actually the proxy in the Philippines. So you have multiple points. And they're hitting on all the points all together. And ultimately, and when you look at geographically, you have all US Army bases surrounding China. So they're preparing. This is not like overnight. Do you think that Trump is going to disengage? Trump is actually, but he's calling, he's calling like, oh, I'm going to lower defense spending. Guess what? He did say the same promise before his last term. And actually, when you look at all the US presidents, every time before being elected, they declared that they would actually go against the waste in military spending. Well, guess what? All of them, they did the same promise, and all of them lied. Now, when you look at this policy paper, they're actually talking about we need to invest more massively into military. It won't change. This is history repeating itself.
So look at this comment on the screen. We just showed how the Trump-linked think tanks are repeating literally the exact same narrative that the Institute for the Study of War, RAND, Brookings, all of these other think tanks are saying about we need to contain China, we need to build up our military, we need to double down on Taiwan, which is literally part of China. So they're talking about cutting off part of China. It's literally the exact same type of conflict the US provoked with Russia in Ukraine, only much worse because the US was provoking war with Russia in a country on Russia's border. The US is provoking war with China using its island province of Taiwan, recognized under both international law and also bilateral agreements between the US and China as part of China. So I don't understand what these people are talking about. It is He's not listening to them. He doesn't need to listen to them because he has his own think tanks repeating the exact same propaganda to him, and he's carrying it out. He did it through his first administration for 4 straight years. And people will even say to me, well, Brian, that his first administration, we admit, it didn't go too well, but that was because he had bad advisors. He had all these neocons that he didn't know they were neocons, and he let them into his administration. And then he did it again. Who's Secretary Marco Rubio? Who is Pete Hegseth? Who are these people? They are warmongers. They are neocons. They are American exceptionalists who believe in American dominance over the planet and eliminating anyone who threatens that domination, including both Russia and China. Now, people, and here's an example on the screen. Chinese Navy tracks first U.S. Taiwan Strait transit under Trump administration. Every single administration does this. Every single administration sells weapons to the administration in Taiwan. And here's the part where, like in the comment section, this is the part where people will start making excuses because they hear this, they see with their own eyes it's true. This is what the Trump administration is continuing to do. This was what Biden did for 4 years, provoking China, and it's what the US continues to do under Trump. And then they will start making excuses about how somehow maybe Taiwan is an independent country and we should defend them. We should go to the other side of the planet and provoke the very same type of conflict with China that Trump is pretending he wants to wrap up and despises and never wanted to fight in the first place against Russia and Ukraine. It really is an exercise in cognitive dissonance and this desire to try to rationalize it, to make it add up when it doesn't. It doesn't add up unless you see through it and you see continuity of agenda. And, we go over this every single time. This is the State Department's official website, U.S. relations with Taiwan. This was from 2022, right here. So this is archived because they've changed it now. And down here, it says very explicitly, we do not support Taiwan independence. We have a longstanding one China policy. That means, and one China is specifically in regards to Taiwan and nothing else. So it means there's one China and Taiwan is part of China. That's what one China means. And people will say, no, that's not what it means because they have to backtrack. Now, under U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, they have erased that. And I saw people in the comment section, someone did a really good, right here. Let's look at this one. In recent changes in the State Department's language about Taiwan, I just showed you that on the screen. Japan accepting Taiwan as citizens if marriage, check accepting, allowing Taiwan citizens work. They're doing all of this. The U.S. is orchestrating all of this to try to normalize the idea of an independent Taiwan, because I'm telling you, they're getting ready to announce Taiwan is independent. And Angelo, you've been warning about this for years. You've been warning that they're tiptoeing towards this.
Can I give you just one example on, small details, but actually extremely important? Taiwan has been declared by Japan as being a strategic ally. Now Japan has done, the Japanese constitution has been written by the US, so it's not a sovereign country. There are US Army troops in Japan. And Japan has actually done a reinterpretation of its constitution, which was Pacific. So it's not supposed to attack, it's only supposed to defend itself. So now the reinterpretation of the constitution says that Japan could actually come at the help of its allies. So that means that by de facto, if Taiwan was kind of attacked, or actually not, it's not attacked, but if China had skirmishes with Taiwan, that means that Japan actually could be involved. So those are small details that makes you understand that Japan could be dragged into the war. But the reinterpretation of the constitution is not out of the blue. This is done for a purpose. The same as South Korea. South Korea, there was this coup attempt, and there was, they used the martial law. Now you have the Kuomintang in Taiwan, which is more pragmatic. They want to have a good relationship with mainland China. They've been pushing to actually amend the law of martial law, because within 30 days, you can actually, the president declare martial law, but and then it's enacted by by the Legislative Council, which is called the Legislative Yuan. So within those 30 days, the damage can be done and it cannot be undone. So basically, they're putting pressure. They want to amend those laws to say, well, within 24 hours, we need to actually have an agreement with the Legislative Yuan. So you see, even within Taiwan, they know that Taiwan could use the martial law to de facto declare independence, which would go against the will of the majority of the population in Taiwan. So those are all small details that actually hints that can tell you this is the direction where it's going. So we need to be extremely careful about this.
Yes, and this is exactly what the U.S. did, spanning several presidential administrations. We've gone over this many times too. This was 2004. This was under the Bush Jr. administration. The U.S. was trying to overthrow the government in Kiev, and they successfully overthrew the government in Georgia in 2003. And then the U.S. armed and trained Georgian forces in 2008. They attacked Russian peacekeeping forces, precipitating the Russian-Georgian war. The EU, in its own report of the conflict, concluded that Georgia provoked that. That was not a Russian invasion. And then, because if you remember, because I remember this, we lived through it, Angelo, the Bush Jr. administration was extremely hostile towards Russia, and they hit a brick wall. Georgia got stomped into the ground. They didn't even come close to undermining or destabilizing Russia. Everything that they were doing failed. So what did the Obama administration do? They reached the hand out of friendship so they could grab onto it, pull them in, and stab them in the gut with a dagger. So this, do you remember Secretary of State Hillary Clinton meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and the big reset? And if you read through this, it's almost identical to all the rhetoric we're hearing about President Trump and making peace with Russia. It's the same thing all over again. Back then, everybody was hopeful that this was for real, but of course, it wasn't.
Yeah, can we add? Maybe we could go back to. I think it's important because that has been confusing, even with the alternative media. And the first reaction we had, we hear, oh, they're dismantling USAID, they're defunding NED, and so on. We need to understand that within the US, there's a mini civil war that was happening. What happens is that those institutions were under the control of the Democrats. They were actually weaponized. Remember the Russiagate, there was actually some internal funding because it was Democrat control. There was funding that actually went into those institutions, including those three-letter agencies that actually worked against their own government, their own democracy. So this Russiagate, you had the CIA backing, they went against Donald Trump, but this is internal war. Keep in mind that we have two factions. One is more progressive, kind of woke, liberal. One is more conservative, but ultimately, those are factions within the 1%. And we even see some that actually went against Trump during the Biden administration. Now they're joining the big tech. Zuckerberg is one of them. So basically now it's a grab of power. This is what happened. So why they're defunding? Actually, they're defunding what is woke, what is not conservative, and what has been actually betraying the Trump. They went against the Trump administration. And it's not going, this is more like they have a conservative agenda, but ultimately, everything that was actually used for regime change actually will still function, but it will be directly under control of Marco Rubio. This is a power grab that happened. What people wanted to hear on the alternative media, and which was pleasant to hear, and including myself, when I hear that, I was like, well, maybe there's some change. But, again, you need to take a step back. This is a power grab. Within the US government, there's a huge civil war happening, and now they're cleaning up, and this is a huge power grab. We are going to go from one extreme to another, but ultimately, US policy is not changing. There's no change into that. It's going to be US-centric with a conservative touch. Before it was globalists, oligarch with the woke agenda. Now it's different. So it's just cosmetic. This is what I want to tell people, really. And again, what is happening, my position and yours, Brian, and actually, and thanks to your input, I've been readjusting too as we go, as we learn more. But it's not pleasant to hear. We're not making friends here. To be honest, we're getting hammered. People, they go against us because there's one thing, there's a wishful thinking. I do wish, same as everybody, I do wish that Maga would be the best. Trump would make changes and so on. In some ways, Trump, when they say, well, Elon Musk is bringing freedom of speech. Yeah, well, this is temporary. When it comes to Gaza, you suppress, he controls the algorithm. It's from one dictatorship to another. And this is a transition time. But ultimately, we are going towards a dystopian world, both internally and externally. Ultimately, we're looking more at the geopolitical side. But internally in the US, this is an oligarch big tech control. You are going to be, they complained about the CPC controlled society and so on. Now it's the oligarch. Those are big tech oligarch with a dystopian agenda. Really, they are going to control absolutely everything. AI, name it. This is a power grab, and those are all the big oligarch. We are talking about billionaires, and when they steal, the Biden mafia clan, they were stealing millions. Those ones are going for the billions. And the Doge project, this is a big trap. On the surface, they're telling you we're saving hundreds of millions, but ultimately they are going to grab billions out of this.
Oh, well, okay, there's a lot there that you said, Angelo. One thing I will say, we don't always agree, and I would disagree with you. I think you're giving them too much credit. I don't think that there is some sort of civil war taking place in the US. I think it is a massive perception management overhaul. And I think it touches on something that you actually said earlier on, that they need to reshape America. What is Doge actually doing? What is the US military actually doing? They're trying to get themselves down to fighting weight because they know they're out of time to contain China and they're going to go for it. And they know they're not ready, so they need to take drastic measures. If you have been listening to the think tanks, and they have podcasts that nobody listens to, like 7 people will listen to them, and I'm one of them, listening to them for years and years. This is all they've talked about, and this is what they have been quietly doing in the background. No one pays attention to it, but they are the ones that run the US government, because again, the corporations have all the money, they have all the power. Technically, they have all of the guns. They send lobbyists to Washington, buy off everyone on both sides of the aisle. Who's opposing this? Who's standing up to this? Who's even talking about this as a problem to solve? Nobody. I haven't heard President Trump talk about think tanks and lobbyists. These are the people that helped fund his campaign. They also helped fund Harris's campaign, because that's how it works. Doesn't matter who you vote in, they win. The unelected interests win. So anyway, this is 3 hours, again, of the U.S. House Armed Services Committee. And you're talking about differences between Republican and Democrat. But if you listen to this and hearings like it, Republican, Democrat, they all agree on the same basic things about China, about Russia, about Iran. You will see them and maybe this is genuine. They might have some small ideological differences and nomenclatures that they might argue over, but in essence, they're talking about the same thing: American dominance and preserving American dominance over the entire planet. Because I've had people argue with me, Brian, this is different. This time it's for real. The US is not interested in global domination anymore. They want a seat at the multipolar table. And I'm trying to think of any time in American history ever where the US picked peace over the pursuit of primacy. I can't think of it. If you can think of it, please drop it in the comment section. I'd be happy to consider it. I don't mean fake peace to buy time to keep pursuing primacy later. I mean actual peace. It has never happened. It's not in their mindset. And this was a point that I really wanted to make. And again, I'm going to drop I'm going to drop this I know it's a big ask, but it's 3 hours. Just jump around inside of it. You don't have to listen to the whole thing. Watch parts of this hearing and listen to the mentality of these people. And again, if you look at this and then you go to Project 2025 or you go to the America First Institute, it's all literally the exact same narrative. China bad, Russia bad. We need bigger military. We need to cut down on costs. We need division of labor between us and our allies. It's all the exact same narrative, no matter where you go. Institute for the Study of War, RAND, Brookings, any of these organizations connected to the Trump administration, it's all the same. This is what they're actually talking about. This is what they're moving towards. And anything that they say that does not line up to this is a distraction so that you don't notice this. And they've done it over and over again, and they're doing it again. They're doing it again. So the other thing I wanted to show, because I see people in the comment section always contesting this notion that Taiwan is some sort of country. The U.S. has every right to defend it. China is evil for trying to reunify complete. And in many ways, and you and I, Angelo, we talked about this many times. In many ways, Taiwan is already economically integrated with the rest of China. And there are things that are going on both sides of the strait that are integrating it in many other ways, very quietly, very patiently. But I want to go to the Shanghai Communication. This was from 1972. This was when President Nixon visited China. China opened up. And again, this was another hand extended to China to grab it and pull it in and drive the dagger into their gut. Because we remember after that in the 80s, there were attempts to overthrow the Chinese government. There were campaigns to cut off Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong. Obviously, Taiwan's been a continuous issue. And if you come down here, look at how unambiguous this language is. The U.S. side declared, the United States acknowledges that all Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain there is but one China and that Taiwan is a part of China. And some people might say, well, acknowledging that they say that is not the same as acknowledging that as a fact. But then there's this part. The United States government does not challenge that position. That is the clincher right there. That is the one telling you that they have a one China policy. Taiwan is part of China. This is what they agreed to with Beijing, that they're now doubling back against, including right now under the Trump administration. This right here is the Trump administration carrying on the Biden and Obama administration violating Chinese sovereignty over Taiwan. The Trump administration selling arms to, where is it? Right here, selling arms to Taiwan. This is a violation of Chinese sovereignty under America's own agreement with China over the one China policy. And this was during the first Trump administration. Do we remember all the way back in the beginning of the Trump administration, Trump changing course on Taiwan gives China an upper hand. And I remember the media all complaining about it. And I was wondering, like, surely they don't believe Trump is really going to do this. And of course he didn't. So he offered the prospect of peace and a great deal with China, but then he did the same thing everyone else does. Arms Taiwan, sail ships around Taiwan, tried to crush Huawei. Do you remember? Where is it? Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei executive, the U.S. under the Trump administration, detained in Canada. And this headline says it all. Huawei arrest of Meng Wanzhou, a hostage in new U.S.-China tech war. So this continues no matter who is president. And at the beginning of each presidency, there's always this window of hope that things are going to change. But again, you have to follow the money, follow the power back to the source of where this policy is coming from. And in the Trump administration's case, it's Project 2025, and it's the America First agenda at the America First Institute. And it's literally the same thing all the other think tanks are saying and doing, except it has Maga stamped onto it to sell it to the American people. That's the only difference. Angelo, you want to add anything to this? I think people can be hopeful about what the U.S. is doing regarding Ukraine, if they at least remind themselves the U.S. is only doing this because they lost the proxy war. So there may be some hope there that may not be irrational, but I do believe that they're just going to freeze it to keep going. But for the U.S. to pivot and do the exact same thing to China or Iran, or to continue sending billions and billions to Israel? How does that make America great again? I don't know. No one's been able to answer that question for me. These are red flags waving, telling you there is something not adding up. Angelo.
Well, I have to say, really credit to you. There's a lot of work out there. I know how much there is. Those are 1,000 pages report. The Senate hearing, what you just mentioned before, that video. I mean, I've tried to watch that, but it's so depressing. So I have to say, people that are watching this show, really, it's important just to support your work. Really, I know how much you work, but it's not only how much energy you put into this, but it's that energy. It's not that positive. It's really, you're going through some pains when you're watching those shows, and actually there's a lot of frustration because it's going against a mainstream narrative, but also alternative narrative, because now we are in a phase where there's this wishful thinking and people don't get the full picture, and they need they still need to go through those papers. It's a hard work. So I would say, really, people, if you can support Brian's work, I know how much your energy and how much from your private life you put into this. But again, we need to be extremely careful, not jump to conclusion, and again, just what happens is that this wishful thinking creates something like cults. We've seen it over and over, and it takes time for people to wake up. And we're not saying that what people want to hear. That's the problem, and we wish the reality was different. Now, here, do you think just for a second that that the U.S. empire would go against this manifest destiny, which is deep into the DNA? It has become part of the American identity. You don't go back from that. The problem is that you need to hit a rock, a wall, big time, so you change direction, and this is the Thucydides Trap. Why Trump would just shift from this long-term policy unless he's 100% sure he's going to lose. Now, Ukrainian war, again, this is going to shape the narrative on the US actually as being a peacemaking, while in reality they lost. That's what Trump is doing. That was the only thing he could do. But in reality, what people will remember is that, they will remember that Trump was the good guy. But just think for a second. Do you think for a second, 1 second, if Russia was losing, do you think Trump would actually make peace? No way. No way. It is because the US is losing. So only that single element would just make you realize, oh, well, wait, maybe he's not. I mean, this is just rational. Just let's stay rational. So we are facing, this is a phase where there's a lot of confusion, and also Trump, this is Trump's personality. He jumps in, conflicting reports, just, that makes people confused. Even us, sometimes we think, oh, is he real? But ultimately, we need to look at those think tank papers that actually shape the long-term policies. Very important. It's a hard work. It's boring, but it needs to be done. And ultimately, it's about actions. Actions, really tangible stuff. So the US having those long-term, plan to arm Taiwan, that says it all. Everything you can say around that, it's meant nothing. Now, if he's defunding a few NGOs and so on, I mean, this is just details. And actually, it's actually, they're getting point internally. It's just internally, it's shaping, it's looking good, but that's internal. But ultimately, we need to look at the long-term picture. Now it's clear. The pivot to Asia was always clear. It was already from Obama, right? Yes. Now there was just a few delays, but he called it the pivot to Asia. He called it. Now it's a matter of time, and actually they're under pressure. Trump needs to disengage extremely fast from Ukraine because the clock is ticking. China is getting stronger, and every single day they're losing. And you've done like multiple war games confronting China, but this is like close to China, and every time the US lost. What happens is that what they want to do is to have a mix. It's going to be like the choke point. Remember the choke points, that's the key thing. This is where China cannot win. They cannot win because China cannot project force. Keep in mind that China can defend itself, but China cannot project force. It's impossible, because they don't have army bases outside China except in Djibouti.
This is a great point, Angelo. This is something we're trying to warn people about. I saw this comment here. Greenland, Panama Canal, Canada, 51st day. Obviously, Trump has given up on U.S. global hegemony and just wants a regional sphere. Europe ain't in that, wants U.S. to pay bigly. But what you just said, Angelo, is the whole key to understanding U.S. designs on Greenland, the Panama Canal, even Canada. If you look on a map, they're all controlling these essential maritime choke points, just as you said. The U.S. admits, watch this 3-hour hearing. They admit that they're not going to take China on head on. They can't. It's impossible. They will lose. They know this. So their plan is to cut China off and fight China in a way China cannot reach them. The Chinese military is confined to China. Imagine that, a defensive force that actually defends a country instead of projects military power worldwide. And so they're taking advantage of that by creating choke points around the world to strangle Chinese maritime shipping, to try to cripple and destroy the economy, just like they did to Russia. So again, it's the same thing over and over again, just different rhetoric used to sell it. So the other point I wanted to make as I was listening to Angelo is that, the Trump administration right now, and I don't think anyone can deny this, they are lying about the conflict in Ukraine. They are blaming the Biden administration. They're blaming President Zelensky. And these people are not blameless. But he's not talking about his own role in advancing this proxy war with Russia. He was the one arming the Ukrainians. Is almost certainly why the Russians felt they had to go ahead with the special military operation. And again, where did that come from? No, I'm going to do it, Angela. I always promise that I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to get extending Russia. 2019, Rand Corporation, think tank paper. People in the comment section telling me Trump doesn't listen to Rand Corporation. That was literally out of extending Russia. I will show you where it was. Ukraine. Provide lethal aid to Ukraine, right there. So don't tell me that the Trump administration doesn't listen to the Rand Corporation Institute.
Brian, you can take also the other examples on the same paper. You have the Syrian rebels, right? You have the extensions in Syria. What they hope was that Russia, like now in this scenario, Russia would keep on fighting in Syria. Why the Russia left Syria was because, or not left, but I would say they didn't fight on HTS, was because it was clear there was a trap that, to overextend Russia.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So this is what we're trying to warn people. Look at the policy papers. Policy does not form in a vacuum. It does not form in a single person's head. No large organization works that way, certainly not a nation the size of the United States with the type of deeply entrenched special interest monopolies that have obviously and openly run U.S. foreign and domestic policy for decades and decades. Why suddenly is everything changing beyond the fact that we want it to change? I want it to change, but I cannot lie to myself and say that it is changing. It so obviously isn't. And I distinctively remember the same sense of hope ahead of the first Trump administration, not really at the beginning of the Biden administration, but the beginning of the Obama administration. Both terms, people were like, well, maybe last term he was worried about getting reelected. This time he's going to end all the wars. No, he didn't. So, how many times are we going to fall for this? Hopefully, Russia and China are not going to fall for it. There's something else. I'm going to do a video because this is exactly 3 years since the special military operation began in Ukraine. And I have this timeline right here. As a matter of fact, I have it here. And I posted this on X. And I'll drop this in the comment section for people who haven't seen it yet. And I do a little timeline showing this cycle going around 2 full times where the U.S. Tried to make peace pretended to make peace with Russia, and then pulled them in, betrayed them, tried to topple them, failed, pretended to make peace with them. There's Sergei Lavrov with Hillary Clinton doing the reset in 2009. And then they did the whole thing all over again. They overthrew the government of Ukraine and they tried to topple Russia, put sanctions on Russia. And again, this took place and was advanced under the first Trump administration. They ran out of arms and ammunition. They are losing the proxy war. This is why they're trying to reset again. That is the only reason. I'm sorry if that is unpleasant to consider. That is what is happening.
That is the kiss of war. Remember the Godfather, when you have Al Pacino who's kissing his brother on the lips, and that was the kiss of war, the kiss of death. It's actually that's what they say. Be close to your friends, but be even closer to your enemies. And I think when you look at the Russian president Putin, what he's doing is playing along. He will play along because he knows the game. He knows the game. He's like, well, they extended their hand. I will take their hands, but he's hedging their bets. His bets. The only thing is that I would say that puts him in a difficult position if there was to have a confrontation, U.S. and China. He would have to take a Russia first approach, especially internally, and you need to have a neutral stance. And by the way, I need to remind people, a lot of people, they still keep on thinking that the BRICS, this new multipolar world, is about, two blocks. It's actually, it is not like this. It is a policy of non-alignment. And China has actually shown a good example when it came to Ukraine. It didn't take sides. And neither should Russia takes sides. The idea is really not to repeat the same mistakes. It is non-alignment. It's not two blocks. This is why people, they make the mistake, this is a BRICS fighting the US. No, BRICS is not fighting frontally the US. Even when it comes to de-dollarization, it's not on BRICS' interest to have the US economy collapse. The idea is that look for what unites us and set aside the differences. Where can we work together? And where we have tensions, we leave that on the side. And so that is the new policy. So what Trump is hoping is that now he doesn't have Russia as an enemy. Let's say if Russia was confronting the US in Ukraine, maybe Russia would join in the Pacific. Now what your objective here is that you get the Russian troops pinned down in Ukraine because they'll be there either fighting or as a peacekeeping force. And now you don't have an enemy in the Pacific because Russia will stay neutral. Russia has no interest to join China, even though it knows that after, if China was to defeat, Russia would come after. But that's the reality, and you need to put yourself into the position of Putin. It's Russia first. Same as China first. You need to look at your own interest.
Absolutely. And, again, if there's one closing thing before we get into the questions, yes, Angela, it's very important that people don't become too idealistic. They're realistic about what BRICS is and what it's trying to do, and what is actually a reaction to U.S. hegemony in this attempt to impose itself on the entire planet. And I haven't heard BRICS talking about disbanding anytime soon because the U.S. now suddenly wants peace and prosperity with the rest of the world. There is always a source for all of this policy. Again, somewhere, someone is going to have to write a paper. People are going to have to come together and talk about if the U.S. was really serious about ending war in Russia, reconciling and making a deal with China. There would be receipts. You would see documents. You would see meetings. You would hear it on the podcast. The U.S. is too big of a system. Policy is done institutionally. There's no way that this could be an agenda without there being some sort of evidence of it. And if there is no evidence, then it doesn't exist. It is a distraction. It is a smokescreen. There, just like a smokescreen, you can't reach out and grab it. You can't reach out and find any sort of evidence basis for believing any of this. This is all I'm trying to warn people about. There are literally thousands of pages of think tank documents spanning decades, including this year, last year. I just showed you some of them. There are hundreds and hundreds of hours of hearings in Congress where all they talk about is this. People that support Trump, that's all they talk about. Secretary Rubio during his confirmation hearing, 3 to 4 hours. China this, China that. We got to confront China. We have to counter China. We need to overthrow the government of Iran. We got to, also they even talked about Russia. I didn't hear anything about making peace with Russia. Honestly, I didn't hear it even one time. So we gotta be vigilant about that. Angelo, unless you have something else to say, we could go through some questions.
Let's do some questions, but I would say when I look at all we've been doing those shows together for 3 years, 2 or 3 years now, and I would say this is probably one of the most important, if not the most important. This is a critical time, especially when people are actually we're facing a lot of counterintuitive elements. This is a lot of things are counterintuitive. And I think this show is very, very critical. And I wouldn't be surprised that 1, 2 years from now, it would be like, I told you. I think it's important, just people need to go back to those policies, those long-term policies, because they do not change. President change, but those long-term geopolitical policies do not change. It's all in there. It just takes a lot of time. And the problem is that mainstream media don't cover much that. And even for alternative media, it's time consuming. You have to do the homework. And in addition to that, what we are facing right now, it's the wishful thinking, really. What we are saying doesn't please even the alternative media. It doesn't please us. Most of our friends, and again, it is a process. We're learning from each other here. What we're living here is unique in history. It's hard to get the full picture, and we're learning. We're learning as elements, unveil, but slowly it's getting more and more clear. But keep in mind, things don't change. Is those long-term policy paper doesn't change. If you read that, if you go through that, it's clear what's your ultimate objective. Ultimately, that you have Biden or Trump, though, it won't change much. Those are small cosmetics.
Yes, and this reminds me of the Arab Spring. I remember it unfolding, and people were so excited. They actually believed initially that it was an anti-Israel, anti-US uprising across the Arab world. This is what they actually thought, because the US deliberately spun it that way. The Western media collectively, just to show you how much coordination there is across the Western media, left and right media, they sold it as that. And I was trying to show people that all of these groups protesting, I have the receipts. They're funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. They have gone to the US years in advance to train, to get equipped, and go back and overthrow the respective nations. This is going to end in tragedy. And people told me to shut up. They said I was wrong. I was raining on their parade. I'm a party pooper. And then it wasn't even a year that it continued to play out. And we watched multiple countries burn to the ground. Libya completely. Syria over the course of years now, and now finally burnt to the ground. And it's not because I'm exceptionally smart. I just looked at the evidence. I followed the money, and I looked at the policy papers, and it's all there. It's all there. Empire is too big to keep a secret. It is not a secret. It's all there, but it's just boring. You have to go through hundreds of pages. You have to track the money down. It's boring. It's tedious, but it can be done. And when you do, you'll have a clear picture of what is going on.
Brian, and I think it's important also for us to remind people what is the foundation, what is the purpose here. We do believe in non-interference. That is actually the foundation. Ultimately, whatever the government is, even if it doesn't please us in terms of values, it doesn't matter. Whatever people in Afghanistan choose should be their choice. What we are highlighting, exposing, is the foreign interference, because there's only Chinese eyes that they can have an objective view of what is good for China. So every single country is the same, because ultimately, if you don't have this approach, that means that as a Westerner, you define your views as being the ultimate benchmark, which should not be that. This is a sense of superiority, and this is imperialism. So our approach is sovereignty, because sovereignty, again, foundation, Sovereignty is the precondition for democracy, because democracy is a process of self-determination. And it goes back always to that. What we're highlighting is foreign interference, because ultimately we believe that every single people should be able to decide for their own government without any foreign interference, which, by the way, it is in the UN Charter. You should not interfere in other countries' policies, and that's what we're doing. Ultimately, who am I to criticize the Taliban if Afghani have chosen the Taliban? I'm not. I'm not going to go into ideology. It's not. Then it's everybody's opinions, but at least we are factual on what we say. Then people, they can make their own opinions, but not about the foreign interference, because there it's obvious. And there's the funding, and that's the control, and that's the meddling.
Absolutely. I mean, this is why I started this, because I'm in Southeast Asia and I noticed U.S. interference. U.S. interference continues, by the way, to this day, despite U.S. aid being dismantled. Again, go to the 3-hour hearing. They talk about U.S. aid and they say, no, it's not defunded. They just took all the DEI and transgender operas out, and it continues. That's what they said at the hearing, and I could see it with my own eyes here. All of the organizations receiving money from these people continue to operate, and they haven't even said anything about any of this. So yes, if the U.S. would just mind its own business, I would have no criticism. I don't care what the U.S. does back in the U.S. They need to leave the rest of the world alone. They're not even pretending that they're going to do that. If you really listen to the Trump administration saying you're going to pivot to China, and people interpret this as meaning some sort of economic contest, but they're sailing warships off the coast of China. Literally off the coast of China. This just happened. So, you got to see what's actually there. Let's do some of the questions. I want to do this one first because I want to clear some things up. It says, are people like Ritter and the Duran genuine in their belief the U.S. has changed? I'm going to separate Ritter out of this. I don't talk about Scott Ritter. I have no use for Scott Ritter. He had an opportunity to help Gonzalo Lira when he was harassed and imprisoned. He claimed that he was an SBU agent. And he convinced many people across the alternative media to ignore and abandon the cause of Gonzalo Lira. And Gonzalo Lira is now dead, partly because of that. That you're complicit. If you don't speak up about injustice, you are complicit in it. So as far as I'm concerned, Scott Ritter doesn't exist. I don't care what he said. You'd be a fool to believe anything he says. The Duran are friends and colleagues. I believe they are genuine in all of their beliefs. I think that they're excellent analysts. They're extremely intelligent. I don't think that they would deny that they're being a little swept away by what's going on. But if you listen to them carefully, and I still listen to them daily, you will hear them criticizing things that the Trump administration is doing. When it came to President Trump's comments about basically obliterating Gaza, both Alex and Alexander condemned it wholeheartedly, unconditionally. They didn't try to make any excuses about it at all, which I can't say the same for Ritter. And when President Trump was talking about how Russia stole hypersonic missile technology from the US, Alex Christoforou said that was completely insane. So as actual events play out, they're going to call it out honestly. And so, these are not the people that I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who are going to justify, spin, ignore all of these horrible things that we say are coming or are already manifesting themselves, and they will continuously ignore it and justify it as they go along. People did this all throughout the first Trump administration. People did this all throughout 8 years of Obama. Those are the people I'm talking about. It's often people that are contacting me or responding to my work that I put out. These are the people that I'm talking about. So
yeah,
I think
I just want to add one more thing, Brian. What we mind is about facts. So if people are lying about facts, that is a problem that actually we mind about this. Ultimately, if we agree on the facts, then the rest is opinions. I'm okay with that. I'm okay I can sit down with anyone with different opinions, but as long as we agree on the facts, we have a problem with distortions of the facts. That's where we have a problem. I think you agree with me, Brian, on this, right? Ideology.
The only thing that matters. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's facts. What are the facts? What is the evidence? If you're gonna say something is happening, and you're gonna just kind of say you wish that it was happening, at least you're honest about that. And facts are facts, and that is another story. Let's go through this. Does Russia realize that any meaningful rapprochement with the U.S. West will necessarily involve the sacrifice of BRICS and the end of the de-dollarization project? The funniest thing is the U.S. is openly saying they want to put a wedge between Russia and China. Again, during that 3-hour conversation in Congress, that's all they talked about as well. And they've talked about this in policy papers. The Trump administration, there are people within it talking about this. So that's obviously what they're up to. That's obviously what they're up to. And is Russia going to fall for it? I don't know. I could only hope that they won't. I could only hope that China won't. I personally know people in Russia and in China, some of them not senior officials or anything, but people that are falling for this. So it's a little bit concerning.
Yeah, I think it's also important to look at the de-dollarization project. It's not actually, there's no rush into that. What is happening is that it is about countries hedging their bets and finding solutions not to be hijacked by the US dollar as a weapon, because the US dollar has been weaponized. So they need to have alternative. And actually, when they're dealing between each other, and they have huge trades between each other, bypassing an intermediary currency makes sense. It's about fees, it's about efficiency, it is about actually hedging fluctuations too. So in reality, they're looking at their own interest, but it's not a frontal fight against the US dollar. It is about hedging their bets and actually looking at other alternatives. And also, it's the fact that the US bonds buying into US debt is actually becomes a huge liability. The value of those debts, because they're becoming risky, is going down. So what they're doing is that they're buying gold and hedging their bets. But it's not, people, they think that BRICS is an enemy. It's not. Even within BRICS, it is, when you're looking at the dollar project, finding alternative of payments within BRICS, it is not imposing a solution for everybody. It's like, we have payment system solutions. You want to join in? Good. You don't? It's fine. It's fine. It's not about blocks. It's about you come in, and there are solutions for a lot of things that we need as a global South, united. The rest of the world. It's not the global South. It's the rest of the world. You come in and you pick and choose what is good for you, but it's not about this alliance that you have to buy in the full solution. It's not.
And I know you said it, but I think it's worth repeating. It's mainly because the U.S. weaponized the dollar. That is why people are looking for exits and alternatives. And if the U.S. didn't do that, if the U.S. played fairly, just play fairly, do that much, this would not even be happening. So the U.S. is complaining about the consequences of its own malicious, malign actions. How about this? How do you think the tech oligarchs' grab for power in the U.S. is going to affect policy toward China? Well, they've always had a grip on power. That's what people don't understand. They have had a grip on power since they existed. Facebook, Twitter, Google were side by side with the Obama administration, burning the Arab world to the ground and trying to do similar in Russia and China, which is why both of those nations ban things like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Are they going to push harder for a fight as they fall behind in our? Yes, of course. That's what we're seeing. That is what this all is a reaction to. And they're shaking things up, and they're willing to do things, dramatic things that they never would have even thought about doing before, because they realize how urgent it is. Again, listen to that 3-hour conversation. They are freaking out over the fact that China is becoming bigger and stronger than they are, and the options are narrowing for them, and they're having a very difficult time adjusting to that new reality. Let's see. Why would American people go for multipolarity? Keeping the status quo benefits them. No, it doesn't. Go to America. I'm from America. I didn't see empire benefiting anybody out on the streets. I don't think only the interest groups benefit from American hegemony. I think citizens get the benefit. Absolutely not. If the U.S. organized its society the same way, say, most normal countries around the world organize it, they would have access to affordable and effective healthcare. They would have affordable housing. prices of goods would be reasonable. Education would prepare them to actually contribute tangibly to society instead of playing games with numbers on spreadsheets. And people would be infinitely better off than they are right now. So I don't think that's a strong argument.
We can take the single example of Ukraine. What was the win, in terms of tangible things when it came to Ukraine? Well, BlackRock, you had Monsanto, you had Cargill. They took lands for pennies, and basically those are the corporations that got extremely rich, and they made billions, probably hundreds of billions. And what happens is that who foot the bill for the U.S. military expenditure, everything that was the grants that was given to Ukraine is average Joe. In reality, though the cost becomes for average Joe, the profits goes to the multinational corporation, the same that actually they fund the politicians and the military industrial complex and those think tanks. Those think tanks are funded by those people that would benefit if they win the war, and they don't even need to win the war. The military industrial complex doesn't need to win wars. It needs to have conflict. So ultimately, when you look at Ukraine, even if there's a freeze, but the EU is rearming, it's going to be US weapons that are going to be sent to EU. The EU is going to raise from 2% to 5%. Those 3% are going to be hundreds of billions of dollars for, who's footing the bill? The EU.
Yes.
Actually,
exactly.
I just saw a tweet just before, was interesting. It was lend to US minerals to lend to US, debt to EU, glory to Ukraine, was something like this, and lend to Russia, and glory to Ukraine. That's the whole thing. You see, they're sharing but ultimately it's to whom benefits those wars, and why you have those think tank papers, who's funding them and who benefits from that. It reminds me of that. There was a very interesting paper, was the task force for Myanmar, and actually they managed to put in power Aung San Suu Kyi, and you saw that actually all those people inside this think tank paper, including George Soros, they were like, how are we going to share the wealth of Myanmar? They called it liberalization, but ultimately it's about getting their hands on the state-owned assets.
Yes, exactly. It's the same thing over and over again. This is a related question. Think tanks like CSIS and Brookings have their own YouTube channels. Yes, and they do podcasts too. Is there any point to listening to these, or is it just pure disinfo? You have to listen to it. They're telling you the plan. They're telling you everything they're going to do over the next 5, 10, 15 years. There's a myth that the US plans in blocks of 4 years as administrations change. This is untrue. These think tanks have plans that span years, sometimes even decades, and they very meticulously, systematically pursue them and put things in place to achieve them. Over the last 4 to 8 years, the US military has been reorganizing itself to fight a war with China in Asia Pacific, thousands of miles from US shores, right off China's shores, in places like the Philippines, the Chinese island province of Taiwan, the Korean Peninsula, Japan, the first island chain. And they have been putting these policies in place and implementing them. They are right now, as we speak, as the Trump administration talks about peace with the world, they're hardening US military air bases all across the Pacific to prepare for waves of Chinese missiles that are going to obviously rain on them if they provoke a war with China. So yes, you should listen to them. They're going to say things that are obviously lies, like Putin is a dictator, President Xi is a dictator, they're filling their rockets with water. I mean, these are ridiculous lies, but at the same time, they're also going to tell you all of their plans, and people should listen to it, because once you see that, you will never fall for the political rhetoric ever again. There is no such thing as analysis by rhetoric. You could try to parse someone's comments, and some people are pretty good at reading between the lines and figuring out what they're actually talking about. But you cannot do analysis like that alone in and of itself. You have to connect it to actual evidence. That's what the think tanks provide. Let's see. Next, this is since we're talking about China and the US, is China adequately preparing for what is obviously coming their way? Taiwan or the Philippines used as proxies, plus naval blockade by the US Navy and Marine Corps. Actually, China's been preparing for this for decades. The Belt and Road Initiative, which the Trump administration itself wants to counter all around the globe, this is supposed to give them alternative logistic routes, lines of communication, if and when the US cuts maritime shipping lanes. That's the whole point of it. And they've been putting this into place for years and years. They are building out a military that is taking shape to be the largest military on planet Earth today. And they're specifically designing it not to span it around the globe, but to protect China with it. Imagine that. So that is what they're doing to prepare. Is it going to be enough? Who can predict these things? Nobody knows. Nobody knows what the U.S. is ultimately going to do. Their plans are constantly changing to adapt to what China is doing to react to this aggression that has been ongoing for a century, over a century. Yes, we talked about that a lot on the show. What about this one? Do you think Georgia will weather the storm? Did they crack the code on resisting NED, at least in their current iteration? They're doing more than most. I could say that, but nobody can predict how these things are ultimately going to play out. You have to understand the balance of interests within a country and how much of that the US has compromised and to what degree they have poisoned a society. It could fail this time, but if the US continues funneling money into these programs, it could continue poisoning society, turning these people against their own best interests. Maybe 5 or 10 years from now, it might work. We've done this in many countries. They did it in Ukraine. 2004, failed. 2014, success. It's a long game, again. Not every 4 years, long game.
I think also, Brian, they're readapting. You see, NED used to be transparent in terms of the funding. Now they shut down all the transparency. And I would say, I predict, that's my own prediction, but I wouldn't be surprised that those NGOs, those intermediaries that actually they go, the money goes through that, the state-owned money, the think tank, all those corporations funnel the money through that. I wouldn't be surprised that those projects would be slowly privatized, that you bypass NGOs. And you see, in reality, when you have like people as powerful as Elon Musk on himself, the power and influence he has actually can make a huge difference. The few percent that are needed in some countries to gain power, through Elon Musk and its network and Twitter, that actually they have enough power. So I wouldn't be surprised that you have those corporations that you actually funded the think tank papers. They actually get more involved into regime change. I wouldn't be surprised. And the privatization, Doge might be about maybe privatization of those tasks. Remember those entities that used to be, they were outsourced to private military. What was the name? I forgot in Iraq. What was right? So those are examples. I wouldn't be surprised that they are going to adapt, as we've been exposing them all along. Now people are familiar to that, but we see they were very late. I'm asking Elon Musk. You're always so late. Where were you? When we were exposing Zelensky's corruption? Where were you when we were exposing all those regime change? Where were you for many years? USAID, NED. We were talking about this all the time. Where were you? Now it's convenient, right? And now you're even jumping on Gonzalo Lira thing, right? You knew about Gonzalo Lira.
Yes, he did.
You knew about this. Now you're just opportunistic. So you see, you need to question that. Those guys, they adapt. You see, let's talk about Elon Musk. Elon Musk, you were attacking the Jewish lobby, and then you turn pro-Zionist. Now you were selling weapons to Ukraine, and now you turn against Zelensky. And he's promoting the clash of civilization. Now he's actually promoting, but you see, I have another example. He's been promoting Corina Machado, was funded by NED, and then he criticizes NED. You see, it's full of contradiction. This guy is just adapting. He's telling, whatever is actually in his own advantage. So I would say people need to be extremely careful. Here we are, Twitter for the time being is free. It's kind of, free, but it controls the algorithm. But it is going to turn into a system of control. So be extremely careful. This guy is not. Don't trust him really. He's part of the military-industrial complex. He has the largest media platform. He has elected the president. I mean, how you need to be cautious. I would say, fanboys, you'll be in for a surprise, And once you start questioning either Maga or Elon Musk, you know what it becomes? It becomes a cult. Stop questioning, and you fall into the trap. That's a cult.
Yes.
What is healthy is questioning. I'm not blindly supporting that system. Keep questioning, and that's a healthy process, because ultimately it becomes a cult. And we've seen those cults. We've seen on the other side the cults of Biden, blindly over, like woke LGBT and so on. That's the same that they're building there.
Just remember that Elon Musk was lending his Starlink communication network to literal Nazis in Ukraine who are using them to carry out attacks. And do they still have access to Starlink? He's out of one side of his mouth berating them, and out of the other side of his mouth telling Starlink to continue enabling access to Ukrainians to kill Russians.
But Elon Musk, people do know, do they know that he was a global young leader of the World Economic Forum, and he's actually the first one actually, going against the World Economic Forum. I mean, come on, he was a global young leader, and those are the very few selected. He's part of the system. And he's just a front man. He's a front man. You see, Elon Musk, he spends so much time on tweeting and so on, and he's got so many companies. He's just the front man, a show man. He might be very intelligent in some aspects, of course, he's better than me when it comes to engineering, and, he's got some good ideas, and he's interesting to listen to, but he's a front man. And he's part of the military-industrial complex. So we need to be extremely skeptical.
Yeah.
And the team, when you look at the team who's behind Elon Musk, we are going for, I think, Whitney Webb, or that's her name, but she's exposing a lot of the whole oligarch team which is behind Elon Musk, and we are in for dystopian world. I tell you, this is going to be about total control. We're going from one extreme to another.
Yeah, and President Trump is the perfect person to usher it all in, because everybody's dropped their guard with their hope.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Expectations have changed. Yeah, and I want to say something else about Musk. If you follow SpaceX, which I have since it started, it is an incredible company. It has achieved incredible things, and I give him credit for that. And people say he's not an engineer. He hired engineers. Well, it's like a movie director. If you don't have a movie director, you don't have a movie. Yes, the actresses, the special effects people, the people who build the sets, obviously the movie couldn't happen without them. But the director is the glue that holds all of it together. And that's what Elon Musk was for SpaceX and Tesla. And I give him full credit for that. And I wish that he spent more time on things like that than getting involved in politics. This shows you what America's biggest problem is. And Angelo, you said this earlier in the show. It is a mindset. It's a deeply seated mindset, Western supremacy. It is the inability to just leave people alone, do your own thing, leave everyone else alone, find common ground and work with people, but otherwise leave them alone. The U.S. is incapable of that. Look at the Trump administration. Look at everyone celebrating the collapse of the U.S. regime change machinery, which hasn't collapsed, which is still there and still operating. And look at everyone clapping and cheering as Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance and Elon Musk, they all take turns poking all of these other countries in the eye. So it's okay to interfere and talk about someone else's internal political affairs when they're saying things that you like, and not okay when they're saying things you don't like. I don't get it. I think the U.S. should mind its own business. If it has really turned over a new leaf, if it's ready for this new life as a benevolent, peaceful nation, start by just getting out of everybody else's business. If you're going to get out of Europe, really get out of Europe. But they're not. They're not going to. This is not going to happen. They're going to take their military out because they need it from China. And Europe is going to do what they have always done, whatever America tells them. And that's what we're going to see take shape. We still got some questions. And Angelo, you don't have to keep sticking around if you're not feeling well.
I can do another 10 minutes. I'll be glad, I'll be glad
I just wanted to say something about it'll come back to me. It just slipped my mind. It'll come back to me.
Is it about Elon Musk? But Elon Musk that's a big topic. That's a full show. Again, I'm the same as you. He's inspiring in some aspect. I'm fascinated about some of his projects, but at the same time we need to be extremely careful. He's part of the 1%. Ultimately, what is happening is that this is still a fight between the 1% and the 99%, and a lot is about dividing the 99%. It's about this divide and control, and it is multiple layers. It's about identity, it's about values, it's about abortion, and so on. You keep the whole society divided, and that's how you control it. And the Zionists and anti-Zionists. But ultimately, if people, they were just to look for what unite them is that they're struggling and they want to put food on the table and those basic things. And this is when I make I look at China as an example, which I've been learning through all those years. I just realized that it is the way that China approached democracy is about finding the whole solution for the 100%, and as opposed to the mob rule we have in the West, which is a dividing system, but ultimately a system of control. It is very counterintuitive, and people, they simplify the democratic process as a casting a ballot. In reality, we need to be extremely careful about that. I've seen the best system is really like something, a system that is pragmatic, that is representing everybody as a society, but a uniting project, not a dividing project. Because you divide people. Why would you divide people if you're a leader? You're a leader of a whole country, and the function of a president should be a uniting one. We see Trump. Trump is actually fighting. You see, he's constantly fighting against the other Americans, the other 49%. That's not the way I see a democracy. It should be about when is the last time that you had a Western president saying, what is the common project we have as a society? Does the US as a project, as a society? No, I don't hear that. What's the project? Conservative versus woke. This is not a project. I'm talking about infrastructure, looking at the benchmark, which are important. Things that, why there's not a politician in the US that actually stand up and says, why my kids will have a lower life expectancy than my generation? Why we have infant mortality, which is going down in the US? Infant mortality, and those are, actually, it's really alarming, really. Emmanuel Todd is probably the best living intellectually, in one of the best in the world, actually, in France. He was actually the one that anticipated the fall of the USSR, and he looked at demographic elements, and it was life expectancy and infant mortality, and actually people making babies too. Those are elements that are critical for sustainable society, and the same benchmarks that you had in the USSR falling, that's what we have in the West, and especially in the US. And in addition to that, what we have, what they fear, what the Trump administration fears, really those elements which are related to societal. When you have nihilism, you have, that's even worse, because you don't have unity. People don't believe in anything, and you have all those benchmark of this collapsing society. Because life expectancy, this is what people want, is really, I have to have a healthy life. Now, why they're going to make America healthy again? Because it's dramatic. the world is actually looking at the US and you looking stupid. Why would you want to export a system where everybody's obese, everybody, life expectancy is going down? You know that in America you have people going to Cuba, communist Cuba, to be treated against cancer. I mean, those are examples, and those are the benchmarks that are important. So, what Maga, Make America Healthy Again, this is an alarm. They got to a point that they hit the bottom, and they really needed to tackle that because it's dramatic.
Well, we always talk about the US system as a blind, dumb parasite that is just constantly just reaching out and grabbing everything and pulling it into its maw and consuming. And I think what is going on is they're trying to add an element of intelligence so they can be a more cunning predator, not just gobbling up everything, but do it with some real purpose, because they see what a disparity is beginning to form between them and these nations they're trying to kick onto the ground, like China. And again, go to the Senate hearing. They talk all about this constantly, all the time. They're talking about how they need to cut waste. They need to, even Democrats will sit there and say, they're not going to sit there and agree with Doge necessarily, but they will say we need to cut waste. We need to slim everything down, eliminate bloat. We have to somehow find a way to compete with China and gain some sort of advantage over them. We could do a whole show on that. I remember what I was going to say, Angelo. This whole show is about the U.S., the supposed U.S.-European split. And, the way I see it is Secretary Hegseth just told Europe, you need to spend 5% of your GDP on weapons and ammunition. You need to get serious. So the next time we start this proxy war up, we can win it. And that is a big ask for Europe. Europe's going to have to tell their people, we need to spend 5% on GDP. Well, nobody's gonna buy that. No one's gonna go along with that. So now they're making this big theater about how Europe and the US, there's this huge split. You have President Trump and Vice President Vance kicking dirt in the face of the Europeans, really trying to, deliberate. It's so obvious. They're deliberately trying to create some indignity and some anger from the European people. So you want to see, we will spend 5% on GDP. This is what they're doing. This is what they always do. I don't know how people don't see through this. This is exactly what's going on.
I have an example to bring in, which is very similar. Remember when we found out that the NSA was spying on the European leaders, and there was a big scandal. People that were outraged. Oh, we need to cut and so on. And actually, this is just a show, because ultimately, most of the EU leaders are pre-selected by the Bilderberg and de facto by the US, and they're working for the US. They're all Atlanticists, and what they need here is actually Trump might help them. It's very counterintuitive. Trump might help them into shoveling. Really pushing for the 5%, because they have constraint. They have constraint of, it's basically the budget deficits compared to the GDP. I think it's 3%. They cannot go, now, because they have limited, resources. Now, with the fear of war, now they can actually bypass those restrictions and they can go over that. But this is going to be at the expense of average Joe and, already, social system, like social welfare. And they need actually Trump to be harsh on them so they can impose upon their population an increase in military spending.
Yeah, so it's a ploy. Essentially, it's a ploy to get to rile the Europeans, to get them to do what the US told them to do, to at least do it more efficiently and more with less kicking and screaming, I guess, would be a good way to put it. Let's see, we just got a couple left, Angelo. Do you think the Sino-American War will start during the Trump second term? If so, what are you doing to prepare to survive such? Nobody knows, and nobody knows what is going to happen when it unfolds. When the conflict in Ukraine began, was anybody able to really predict how that was going to turn into this war of attrition? Angelo, you and I, we were covering it in the initial phases. We didn't know what was going. You had to wait to see how it plays out, because it's unprecedented. Every time war breaks out, it's unprecedented, because you're talking about all different types of weapons, all different types of technology, technology not just for the military, but for your economy, for the communication, for influence operations, so on and so forth. So there's really no way to predict. As far as surviving it, you know what I think is the best policy? Let's raise awareness of the fact that the US is pursuing continuity of agenda. Let's blunt this tidal wave of emotion that is sweeping everyone away. Nobody can deny that. Look around you. People are being disarmed of their critical thinking, their skepticism, their sense of just remembering recent history, remembering how the first Trump administration even played out. People are being robbed of that by this emotional tidal wave. Someone has to blunt it. Like, I don't want to be the one to rain on people's parade, but if that gets people skeptical again, engaging with their critical thinking, asking questions instead of just allowing it to sweep them away, then that's what we have to do, because it's better to prevent World War III than try to think of some strategy to survive.
Brian, do you want to touch just a little bit, what would you do as an individual? Maybe that's part of the question. I don't know, I'm just, throwing just out there. I would say, let's say if there was a major confrontation, it would be best just to be in a neutral country, non-aligned country. And I would say hedge your bets especially when it comes to money. So physical should be real estate, gold, and it's not a coincidence that gold the last year has been growing by 45%. At least I would hedge my bet on that. Have physical gold, and but neutral country, non-aligned country. So yeah, that's all I would be. And self-sufficient. At least the country needs to be self-sufficient.
Yeah, self-sufficiency. I'm here in Thailand. This is a huge topic here in Thailand. The kings of Thailand for at least the last 2 generations have promoted self-sufficiency in terms of, make sure your country can do everything on its own, and then trade and interacting with other nations. That's extra that you can do. And then even you as an individual, as a family, make sure you're growing food for yourself on your farm before you're growing stuff to sell. So, and then there was an economic crisis here at the late 90s. This is long before I was here. And people who were following that advice from the King of Thailand, they didn't even know anything happened. And the people who completely depended on the international system that sucked them in and then pulled the rug out from under them, those were the people jumping from high rises. So self-sufficiency, that is good advice, I would say, at any time in history.
As an individual too, actually I forgot, but you made an extremely good point. Is really being self-sufficient. If there's, if it gets to war, really bad, I would say even as an individual, you need to be self-sufficient, being able to grow your own food. I think, and as countries, this is actually what this multipolar world is trying to advocate. Is really like globalism has gone too far. You need to be self-sufficient if there's any tensions. Exchanges, free trade is good, but up to a certain extent. And I would say.
Yes, maybe we can do a whole show on that. And I've been meaning to, because I have an old video from a few years ago where I did cover self-sufficiency in Thailand. It's an incredible philosophy. I personally live by it, and I think there's a lot of wisdom there to share. Do you think young men are more likely to join the military now that Trump is in charge as opposed to Biden or Harris? I don't know. The U.S. military has recruitment problems, and then they sort them out, and it doesn't really seem to correlate to the administration in power at the time. This tidal wave of emotion, if this were coupled with, say, like a false flag attack, then you would see recruitment skyrocket, which is exactly what happened after the attacks on September 11, 2001. That is exactly what happened.
Actually, the paper you mentioned just before, I forgot what's the name.
Project for New American Century, or Extending Russia.
No, Project of
American
Century actually touches on that, and yes. What they say is it says clearly that we need to be make America great again in terms of values, in order to give incentives to it's give incentive in terms of it's more like indoctrination. So once you instill the sense of patriotism and family values and so on, you would have those kids to enroll much easier. So they're saying that clearly what happens that the DEI policies from the woke liberal Democrats was damaging to the military. So you see MAGA in itself, you see how it's working in favor somehow for the imperialistic project, because you need kids to be indoctrinated up to a certain level to be willing to die into trenches. So there's indoctrination to be involved there.
Project 2025, that's the one.
Project 2020,
yes,
yeah, Project
yes,
2025.
yes.
Yeah.
Project for a New American Century was actually talking about how the U.S. needs to revitalize its military and industry. This was all the way back in like 1999 or 2000 maybe. And they said, we're not going to be able to do this unless there's some cataclysmic catalyzing event. And then like the next year was 9/11. Coincidence? You decide. Here, since Trump retook office, has Trump derangement syndrome revealed itself to be bipolar affliction? I don't really know what that means, but I take it to mean, because this is what I say, Trump derangement syndrome is a two-way street. There are people out there who just hate Donald Trump or hate Elon Musk, and no matter what they do, these people are going to complain about it, and they have irrational hate. They're not picking out actual things that are being done and talking about that. They hate these people as human beings, and they are obsessively hateful towards them. And this is a derangement syndrome. On the other hand, there are people who are, as Angelo pointed out, that are so enamored with these people that their critical thinking is switched off. They stop questioning and they start defending everything, no matter how bad the thing is that they're doing. These people will find a way to defend it, to spin it, to excuse it. Since someone brought up Scott Ritter, I heard him actually trying to spin Trump's comments about Gaza, about how he didn't mean it, and genocide, so what, who cares? I mean, it's like, it was really insane to watch and behold. And there are people out there doing that. So I'd say, yes, it's a two-way street. It's a two-way street.
Yeah, the problem is that we are being hammered from both sides, and actually it is becoming difficult, because sometimes you don't even dare to say a good thing. I have nothing to say from the Biden side. There's nothing, a single thing positive, but sometimes you might want to say positive things from the Trump, and people, they assume that you are pro-Trump. No, I mean,
yes.
There's no more nuance, really. It's a cult. You need to be part of that. You either for us or against us, and it's not like that. It's people are losing. It looks like a football game. You can go to a football game and be neutral and trying to be objectively and saying who the tactics and just objective. Now here it's about a cult. You need to be part of that cult or the other, and people get confused if you are saying something like good about one side or the other, or negative about their side. So it's dangerous, really.
Yes, and I mean, I always try to warn people about emotions. We're all emotional. It's not as if I don't get angry or I don't have hope that things will change, but you have to completely 100% separate that when you're doing analysis. Your analysis needs to be cold, analytical, no emotions involved. You have to just follow the truth wherever it takes you, no matter how uncomfortable. So like when I was looking at the October 7th operation into Israeli-held territory, if you do actual analysis, you will see that Israel has the manpower, the weapons, the ammunition production domestically, and of course, supplies coming in from the US, if they pace themselves, to flatten Gaza. And this is what I told people. They didn't want to hear that. And so they just said I'm a Zionist shill or whatever they were accusing me of at the time. And it turned out to be true, because that was cold hard analysis. It was an answer I didn't want to see or believe, but that was the answer. And so you have to accept it no matter what. And this is what we all have to, everyone is challenged with this every day, even in their personal lives. And it's up to us every day to choose whether we're going to rise to it or succumb to it. Last one. This is the last question. How much, Mike has asked a lot of questions, and thank you, Mike. They're very good questions. I know you had more, but we have a limited amount of time. How much does the average congressperson know about U.S. imperialism? I have a hard time believing that people like AOC or Rashida, I don't know how to pronounce that, my apologies, support these policies. I don't know who the second person is. I don't really follow left, right, Republican, Democrat policies. I do listen to the hearings in the Senate because that is important. But the internal political theater, I don't pay attention to. It's noise. I will say again, go listen to this. They know America's an empire. They're very proud of American imperialism. They want to preserve American imperialism. Might not call it imperialism. They might call it some American dominance in economics, military, trade, influencing other countries. At one point in this very hearing, he said, I think regime change shouldn't be a dirty word. I believe that if we can change a government and make it a friend of the U.S., we should do it. I kid you not, it is in here. Let me share a trick for people. Most YouTube videos like this will have show transcript. You click on that and it opens up here. And then you type in the phrase that you want to find. So like regime change, you just type it in. It says, 2 words seem to be dirty words. Okay, people, we don't want to hear it and we shouldn't be doing that. I don't share that opinion. As a matter of fact, I believe that when we can, we should turn enemies into friends. So he's talking about using regime change. So that is what is actually being said in Congress. So of course they know all about American imperialism. They wallow in it like pigs in mud, happy pigs in mud, and they love it and they're never going to give it up. So the idea that President Trump and his administration, who has supporters in these discussions, going along with it, they're not ever going to give it up. They're just
but Brian. But they know better what is best for those population. And they are selfless, right? They are selfless. We know better what is good for China. What we are, come on, Brian, we're bringing them democracy and freedom because they're not free. They are not free.
And they don't know. They don't know better. They're not smart enough to know better.
Why they have 90% of approval there? You know, this is a Western-funded institute. Why they have 90%? But they don't know. They are not happy, but they don't know it.
Right? Yes. And Angela was joking and being sarcastic, but actually that is the tone that they have in the Senate, in the House of Representatives.
I do think that maybe some people, it's delusional. But there's a sense of superiority behind this. When you assume that you have a manifest destiny, and you assume that, we have that in China. You see, a lot of people that arrive in China, the first reaction is really like, oh, maybe I have something to bring them, to teach them, and it's true. It's true. Many people, they think, because you're US Western-centric education, we learn about only our education and our values, and you think that maybe somehow you can bring in something. What happens is that it's a humbling, journey, and ultimately you just realize that you don't know much. And by looking from the Chinese perspective, you realize that our own world is messed up. But ultimately, I would say that everybody needs to deal with their own stuff in their own home. That's what I mean. Because why would you have your neighbors to come into your home and say how you should manage with your own family and whatever is happening in your kitchen? No. And that what happened, really. And I think some are genuinely, maybe they really believe that they have something to bring to them, right? Exactly.
Yes.
White savior complex.
Because I see it here in Southeast Asia. And it's funny because people always accuse the right-wingers of being racist. And there are a lot of them who are just overtly racist. They think non-white people are inferior and white people should just do whatever they want anywhere they go. The funny thing is the left-wingers are also racist, but it manifests itself in a different way. Just as you were saying, Angela, they look at Thailand, they're like, oh, they're not doing democracy and they're not doing all the things that we think are the best idea that there is, and they're too dumb to know that this is better for them. So I'm going to help impose it on them. They're the ones that are taking the NED money. Oftentimes, some of the fake NGOs here in Thailand aren't even founded and run by Thai people. They're founded and run by white Americans. It's insane. And that's the mentality they have. These people are too dumb to know what's best for them, and we're going to impose it on them for their own good. And if you talk to them, they really seem to believe it, just like you say, Angela. They really seem to believe it. If you're an honest person and you come from a society that encourages supremacist thinking, just come here and be quiet and listen, then you're actually going to learn something.
I was in Thailand last week. I was in Thailand last week, and you come across. I mean, Thailand is a huge hub, CIA hub, and NGOs for the whole Southeast Asia. You know
yes.
that.
Yes.
And I come across those foreigners, Westerners, and actually, when you ask them what you do in Thailand, when they say I'm from an NGO, it's like a status. They actually feel, just by saying that, they feel they are contributing to something which is bigger than themselves. It's like a divine mission. Because I really believe, they really believe that they're bringing something, but they don't realize that in reality, that's the white savior complex, that in reality, they are there to disrupt and contain, because it's a containment, behind that agenda is a containment policy. It's how you can keep them poor and keep them, vassalized.
Yeah, and I would say this. I mean, obviously, my parents brought me up to be a good person, but some of the most important lessons that I've learned as a human being have been from Thai people, just teaching me from their perspective and showing me the way they do things. And it is a completely different approach. And if you stop judging everything and looking down on everything, you just listen and learn. It never hurts to learn new things. And I have to say it has made me a better person. I can see who I was before and who I am now, and the huge difference that has made, especially in terms of empathy for people that are different than you. Just because someone is different or acts different, instead of condemning them or looking down on them, you should help them, or at least try to see it from their point of view. Why are they acting like that? It's a big thing here. And I've learned a lot of lessons like that. So anyway, we're at 2 hours. Angelo, you said before we started the show that you only want to do 1 hour because you were feeling unwell. I thank you very much for hanging in there for an extra hour. We'll keep talking about this topic in future live streams. I want to thank everyone who joined us in the comment section and everyone who is watching this after the live stream. And check the video description below for all the places you can find and follow both mine and Angelo's work. I also put the links to the Project 2025 in there, so you can go check it out for yourself, read it, and you tell me if that looks like a blueprint for world peace or a blueprint for continuity of agenda. And I think we cleared a lot of things up in this live stream, Angelo. So again, thank you. And until next time, bye for now.